the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Good morning from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio in Stoneville. Tom and I have a special guest, Bobby Golden from Leland.
How are y'all?
We're doing good, brother.
Fantastic.
Caught Bobby in town, which is harder to do than you might think it is.
Hey, he's kind of like a greased pig. You see her 1 minute, gone the next, and you ain't going to grab him.
I was in Colorado yesterday, and I'll be in Fresno Monday, so you got me on a Good Friday.
But not Good Friday.
But not Good Friday.
Right.
That
it
is
a
correct.
Good Friday to catch him.
It was a Good Friday to catch me with the rain in the forecast and office work planned today.
Tom, I've kind of capped out on questions, and I feel like my originality has been suffering lately. But I got one for Bobby. I think it's good. So allow me a second to develop it, Bobby.
Okay.
We live in what you could refer to as a culinary mecca.
I would agree.
We have some really good stuff around here. We have some really unique stuff around here that maybe we take for granted, and you bring people from other parts of the country here, and they look at you like you're from the moon because we eat ABC. Hot tamales, fried pickles, fried green beans. They've kind of come up over the last few months, years, whatever. So, Bobby, you have been everywhere and done everything in the last 4 or 5 years. Domestically, where have you gone and they have offered you something to eat and you said, I don't know about that?
Domestically.
Yeah, because I know you've been overseas some too, and maybe we won't have a concept of that. But
oh, well. We might have to
and the one I thought about, and this is not quite domestically, but at least it's on the continent. They sold us some ribs in Canada that weren't ribs. They were like pork nuggets.
Yeah.
I don't know why they called those ribs.
If you're in Leland, that'd kind of be like riblets.
Yeah.
Right. Those pork shoulder pieces that we slice up and use.
It certainly was not a rib.
No, it was not a rib. Wow, something that I'm just like, I'm not sure. Well, one, I don't cull much. So.
Right, and that's why the question's appropriate for you.
Oh, wow.
It's almost appropriate for anybody. I mean, eating should be an adventure. That's what we all tell our kids when they're young. Eating is an adventure. Don't say no often. Lots of things that you think aren't going to taste good. Brussels sprouts.
Oh, Idaho has some of the best Brussels sprouts in the world.
Well,
excellent.
Learned something this morning.
Yeah, so staple on the menus up there. So that's good. I'm trying to think. Let me see. We'll have to come back to that.
I think you stumped him.
You did.
I can't believe it.
Well, let me take it another direction,
Okay.
a slightly different direction. What's the strangest thing that you've seen offered to eat?
Why has it got to be about food?
I'd just back it up and say, would you rather eat a meal here where you live or somewhere else where you've gone? And if it's somewhere else, where is it and what was it?
Look at Tom piling on.
Oh, wow. It really depends on what you're talking about, right? Because we eat all over the world,
Yeah, I've eaten a lot of places too.
And I guess the better thing is what food reminds you of a place, or if you were here, what would you eat on the menu, right? So that's kind of the. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm a huge fan of lobster, but I will almost only eat lobster in the Northeast.
Yeah,
because I think they do the best job cooking it, and that's not saying they can't cook at other places.
Right.
I know when I go to the Northeast, and I'm talking Maine, I would rather eat lobster in Maine right off the boat than I would anywhere else.
Right.
So we still don't have an answer from Bobby.
We don't.
Wow. What I mean.
But I riffed off of it, so we should.
I'm sitting here trying to think, and I'm like, wow,
He's been too many places.
I've been too many places. Actually, I've been too many places.
I think the no answer is the answer. I think the answer is there's not a better place to eat than the Mississippi Delta.
Well, it depends on what type of food you want. Again, we are so eclectic mix of cultures here in the Mississippi Delta. You can find pretty much anything you can want. You can get good Southern fried food. You can get Italian food. You can get Mexican food. You can get American food. You can get French food. Because we are a melting pot in the Mississippi Delta. If you look at the greater Mississippi Delta from New Orleans to, call it the Boot Hill of Missouri, we'll even go past Memphis, right? You tell me right now, what food other than your northeastern elitist lobster
Sorry.
that you can't get between Memphis, Tennessee and New Orleans, which is all 2.5 to 3 hours from our house, that you would rather eat anywhere else in the world?
I don't disagree with you.
No, I don't disagree with you either. I love the food here. I think it's spectacular, and you can get just about anything anywhere you're at. And the fact that you now have all these places popping up that are a little bit more farm to table, local type things, I think it's kitschy within an area.
Farm to table.
Can you define kitschy?
No,
I didn't think so.
not this morning.
I couldn't define it in the afternoon.
So the lengthy discussion about food leads us into the topic that we invited Bobby here to discuss with us today. No idea where this is going to go, but what we asked Bobby to come and discuss with us is just the big picture of soil fertility. And so this is getting Bobby squarely back into his roots. I don't know anybody that knows more about soil fertility than Bobby. There maybe is, but I don't know him.
You probably know him.
He is my one-stop shop for soil fertility.
I still rely on him.
Up to and including yesterday. One of the things that I want to hear your perspective on, we've had multiple episodes this year about the ESA and the long-term influence that enforcing that law and the way the EPA is going to start to label pesticides. And I say pesticides, I think most of what we've done up to this point, Tom, has been herbicides.
That's
but
right.
the insecticide strategy, the fungicide strategy are both in the works. So, Bobby, you have talked off and on for decades now about the kind of the attack on fertilizer and the perception of fertilizer, and I think it lands squarely in this same arena as what we've talked about with the pesticides. So what is the global perception of inorganic fertilizers and the way we grow crops?
The global perspective is different depending on where you stand, right? So everyone has a different opinion of what a farm is. Everyone has a different opinion of what a working operation is. And everyone now, I think, is as you get out the world, are more educated or trying to be more educated about where their food comes from, okay? The one thing that will not change with this, and I'm backing into what you're asking, but the one thing that will not change with this is there is a linear relationship with fertilizer use and food production, okay?
No question.
And if we're going to feed, I just quick math, 8 billion people on the planet, we've got to figure out how to accomplish that if there is a linear relationship between global fertilizer use and food production, okay? So we're expected in 2024 to use 200 million metric tons of fertilizer. That's NPK when I talk about that, right? And we know that fertilizer roughly accounts for 50% of the global food production. So you talk about ESA and you talk about attacks. I don't think ESA is the one that's really driving an attack on fertilizer.
Yeah, no, but it's the same concept.
Right, same concept. I think where we have an issue with fertilizers, and specifically nitrogen that you see a lot in phosphorus, is with pollution, okay, and with greenhouse gases. A lot of people think about phosphorus and eutrophication in areas, right? Runoff, stuff like that. Chesapeake Bay, up in the Michigan and through there around the Great Lakes and down in the Gulf, right? And a lot of that, yeah, some of it's attributed to fertilizer, but it's a lot of things that go into that model. Nitrogen use, on the other hand, is nitrous emissions and greenhouse gases and all of that great stuff. So what percent nitrogen is our atmosphere?
I don't remember.
You should remember that, Tom.
More than the average person walking around believes. How's that for a middle-of-the-road answer?
Google it, Tom. Tell me how much it is.
Well, keep talking while I'm doing that.
Okay. So basically, the climate change and the mitigation processes on how to stop greenhouse gases from large-scale agriculture is where the push is on reducing nitrogen use or being more environmentally friendly with the nitrogen fertilizers we need to use. And I think that's where the conversation needs to be centered on, not necessarily reducing fertilizer use, because if I told you earlier, fertilizer use accounts for 50% of the food production. If we reduce that, how do we feed a growing world? I think where we need to be talking about is how can we be more efficient? How can we be more environmentally sustainable with the fertilizer we do use?
What'd you get, Tom?
I have a response from Google. Jason's response is spot on. And granted, he did not give a number, but his number was, or his response was related to how people would conceptualize what's present within the atmosphere. Google's response is approximately 78%.
Right. And most people would think, I breathe air, I breathe oxygen, I need oxygen to breathe.
That's right. So when you asked that, I was ballparking somewhere between 5 and 10%, and that's just because
my number was 20.
Yeah.
I have forgotten more about that early high school science type thing.
Well, I think that makes our point to a degree that the average person walking around, including you and I, Tom, does not have a full concept of the big picture that we're discussing here this morning.
Just using that as a very simple thing, and I always use that. I was talking to a group of college students the other day, and this question come up. How are we going to feed the world and be more sustainable?
Did you ask that, or did they ask that?
They asked that of me.
Okay.
And I said, you know what? We're working every day on principles and practices to be more sustainable and grow more food per unit of input than we ever have in our life. But I don't have the answer for you today. I cannot answer how we're going to get there today, but I can tell you that the work we do every day is going into developing that answer. And this young lady said, well, how can you say that? You're working on it, but you don't know. I said, can you imagine a life without an iPhone? Because I said, ever since you were born and come of age, you've had an iPhone in your hand. When I was your age, I never thought this was possible.
Yeah, I blew the mind of my technical support staff and the intermittent summer workers the other day when one of those kids turned 30. Said, today's my 30th birthday. Said, let me give you a date in history then. I said, I graduated high school 34 years ago. Said, so that was before you were born. Said, I remember going to college, and the one thing I took to college was a word processor. Not a computer, not a typewriter. Somewhere between a typewriter and a computer, less capable. Small screen. I think it had 4 to 5 lines
Tom,
on it.
I don't want to date you, but you do know what an Encyclopedia Britannica is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We had
World Book.
Americanas.
We had World Book.
We had those too.
Yeah, we had
had
World
2
Book.
sets of them.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And
So
now everybody has it in their hand, but I mean, you're right.
So that's my take. We can sit here and talk about the big picture, and we can talk about where we're going. But 2 things are inevitable. Everything changes, and we'll know more tomorrow than we know today. So just because we don't have an answer today doesn't mean we won't have an answer tomorrow. So you wake up every day, you go to work, you learn things. And if you ever stop learning, then we won't have an answer. We won't develop iPhones. But just because I can't tell you how we're going to feed the planet today, look at the inventions that have happened in the last 50 years to get us here. You know, we're in squarely the middle of Gen X, right? We grew up with people that started riding horses before there were automobiles. You know those people intimately.
That's a fact. And then I have a 7-year-old who I cannot explain the concept to her of the phone being attached to the wall.
So look at that span, right?
So
And I know that's way away from fertilizer use, but I guess going back to say what we started on in here, most of the advancements in fertilizer happened post-World War II. And now we're, I think, on the cusp or the brink of having more advancements as we start looking for biologicals and more natural ways to improve our fertilizer sustainability and use. And I think we're being driven in that respect due to climate change and nitrous emissions into the atmosphere and stuff like that. So when we start talking about regulation, when we put regulations in place, it forces the science to look in an alternative avenue. And what we generally find in those alternative avenues is how to be more efficient.
So my original question on the global perception, I asked it like that with something specific in mind. And the specific in mind was that most of our domestic fertilizer consumption is sourced globally. And so that's why I used the word globally in my question. So over the next foreseeable future, say it like that, what is the stability of fertilizer production and consumption if we are going to, like you said, feed the growing population and at the same time, or in order to do that, improve efficiency? Because you can only innovate on a certain percentage at a time. There have been very few inventions, practices, whatever, that captured the market overnight. There is an adoption process that has to go on, some more rapid than others. So what is our long-term projection of the stability of production and consumption as we innovate and come up with ways to be more efficient to feed the population?
I think the stability relies around one thing, and that's energy production. Because, if you look at phosphorus, if you look at potassium, look at things we mine, we know how long those mines are going to last, and we've got plenty of reserves. If you look at, generally the number one fertilizer we use worldwide is nitrogen. Why? Because most all soils are devoid of nitrogen. Most all nitrogen is basically using a Haber-Bosch process to produce it. Very energy intensive. So look at the stability of energy prices, particularly natural gas. I think that's where the stability factor in price really mimics, and that's really what you're talking about right now.
Correct,
It's all about price. It's not about, are we going to run out? It's, can you afford to use it?
Yeah. Can you get it? And when you get it, can you afford to buy it?
Yep. And I think that all revolves around energy prices. And so if you bring that back to climate change and what we're doing to go to more sustainable energy practices, how does that influence fertilizer production?
But in a broad sense, then, we need to consider how all of these things fit together that you're talking about. So mining the basic resources that we have to produce and continue to produce synthetic fertilizers, and then how things like biologicals may fit in and aid in capturing additional yield. Is that a safe assumption to make? I mean, that's a bad word to use. A safe statement to make on that particular practice.
What is the question?
Because those things fit together. Synthetic fertilizers with biologicals. Should we be doing more research and how those may be utilized more efficiently to enhance our capability to produce food?
Oh, I think we definitely need to be doing more research in that arena, and we definitely look down that road. It's kind of like the glory days of soil fertility, right? If you look at post-World War II, it took World War to develop fertilizer. Or go back to World War I, right? Those first turn of the century years where we had to make bombs, and then we figured out, we can make fertilizer too. That was a big advancement. All right, then where are we at today? Go back to what we earlier said. What's driving the next advancement? It's kind of regulation. So we're looking at these softer chemistries because some of those things that are going on in the EU, and it's floated across here because if we're selling our products, some of their practices are demanding that we use those products. So what's the next evolution of fertility research? It's how are we affecting, or how are we complementing what's going on in the natural environment? And it's super complex, okay? So how are we isolating certain organisms out of the soil to put back in? When you talk about biologicals, that's what we're doing, right? We're taking a naturally occurring organism that has an affinity to do something we want it to do.
If it's an organism, because
what's the definition of an organism, Tom?
I struggle when they call things that are an extract of something that's not necessarily a bug. It is a biological product because it's an extract that was produced by something else. So it's biological based.
So are you talking about metabolites, or are you talking about?
Absolutely.
Well, I think
But I think
that
we
term-
struggle with that term because we don't have a great working definition, and I think lots of people have a different definition and expectation for the use of that word.
You're right. I think that the umbrella term biological, there's a lot of things
That fit under it.
get thrust into that category because there's not another category for them. They're not a herbicide. They're not a fungicide. They're not an insecticide. They're not a fertilizer. They're something else. Well, what's the something else? Well, there may be 20 something else's categorically, but they all get shoved into this one because that's the one we have now.
And they all have different properties and can be expected to do different things.
I think that's exactly right.
I think
I'll say
that's
this.
a fair statement to make.
Have you ever went to the BPIA website?
No.
Do you know what the BPIA is?
No. But I've probably seen it somewhere.
Okay. So let's start there.
Well, tell us what BPI
Yeah,
is
man. I'm
first.
sitting on the edge of a cliff here.
It's the Biological Products Industry Alliance. It's the organization that supports that for the industry. So I think we rush to go out there and say there's nothing talking about this. When have we looked? Look at what the Fertilizer Institute's doing right now with the new biological certifications, where you have to cross a barrier to get a stamp of approval, just like we do with Omri and organics and other things, right? The industry is trying to police itself as we get on the cusp of these new things. And are we keeping up with what's going on?
I think it's innovation, and there's growing pains in innovation, and what you're experiencing and observing right now are those growing pains in the innovation.
And I haven't seen one person that's a good one-stop shop to give you the information on all those things. And I think that's my level of confusion is I think everybody refers to them differently.
Well, take what we do here, Tom. I can go out and take a herbicide, say it's a residual herbicide, and maybe my soil condition and population of target weed just happens to line up where I just hammer it, okay? And man, we never did that before. That's going to work. Well, then you take it whatever, 100 miles down the road, the soil condition changes a little bit. Yeah, we still kill the weed. Hey, also kill the crop. Not going to work. And we've done that before. But if you take my word for it, it was a good thing, and I think a lot of this is the same kind of thing. Somebody legitimately brings you something and say, man, this is going to work. Well, it does either sometimes, not all the time, it worked in their testing, or it works under certain conditions, but not all conditions, and there's just not enough information on them yet. And I think, again, that's the growing pains of innovation.
Well, I think when you're on the growing pains of innovation, right, and you're on the tip of the spear, you're always going to be like that. If you go back and look at, a lot of the work we did when we started, hey, let's bring in some of these original nitrogen stabilizers. Let's look at nitropyrin and DCD and a lot of these type of nitrogen stabilizers that react differently in different soils because there's different microbial populations in soils, right? I mean, we've been looking at those products for 50 years. And they work differently in different soils. They all work. But go back to some of the research that we were doing here, right? In the half-life of nitropyrin on a sharky clay is completely different than the half-life of nitropyrin on a forest dell.
Well, soil adds an environmental component all itself because your classification may change or alter that environment within the soil profile. And that conceptually is a difficult arena to even talk about.
Well, so and you also go back to, you have to look at all these new products as the same way we look at soft chemistries, right? We do a lot of organic soft chemistry stuff, and we're completely fine when we get 40 to 50% control. That's a home run. You would never be fine with that if you're spraying a herbicide.
That does not get you bold print in the weed control guide.
Right.
Which is what we're looking for.
But if you're using a soft chemistry, what's acceptable results? I'm asking y'all. Y'all are the experts that work for the university.
I say it depends.
Yeah,
It depends on what it is.
That's right. I think it depends as well because year in and year out if you could maintain that, because there might be years in my discipline where it's 50% one year and 15 the next.
All right, so what's the best soft chemistry fungicidal product that you've ever seen?
I'd have to struggle to sit here and think about it. I mean, I've looked at a lot. Some of them have looked okay, and I could get myself into trouble if I start diving off into some of those others.
Okay,
And
well,
So I'll give
so,
you.
so let me say this. Okay, what's okay? I'll tell you how we use a lot of soft chemistries in other parts of the world, where we're having to spray fungicides every week, or we're having to spray insecticides every week to fruit and vegetable production, tree fruit production. Okay. What you're doing with those soft chemistries is you're rotating them with your hard frac groups to do this thing that we've heard you all talk about as IPM. So what we're doing is trying to help resistant management by using a soft chemistry instead of keep spraying the same frac group over and over. We're mixing those modes of action to prolong the chemistries we are using.
And in some of the situations where I've looked at that or been expected to look at that or have been aware that someone has looked at that, it's been a soft chemistry integrated with some specific frac group, and they've reduced the amount of fungicide of that particular frac group, which in fact does not provide enhanced longevity or reduced resistance or the occurrence of resistance to that particular frac group. All you're doing is you're reducing the amount of effective product that's there, because it's based on one application in a row crop setting.
And that's what I'm saying.
So rotating those things in there is difficult.
Well, what I'm saying is you're looking at it through one lens of I'm spraying soybeans.
Well,
right?
I think some of those work in some specific settings, and in some instances they're looking at the effectiveness in a row crop setting. And in a lot of those cases, it may not be as efficacious in a row crop setting as it has been in an orchard.
Oh, I tend to agree with you, but you're looking for a silver bullet, and we're looking to prolong. Yeah, how many soybeans have you ever eaten in your life?
Maybe more than the two of you, but probably not as many as some other people.
Not as many as you've eaten almonds.
Yeah, no.
Or lettuce.
Yeah.
We get caught up because we grow commodity crops here. We get caught up thinking in a silo or a vacuum of this is what it is. And in translation to really the crops we grow here are for the meat we eat, right? Most of the corn and most of the soybean that we grow in this area is being used for animal feed at some part down here.
Eventually.
When we talk about global food production, we got to think about more than that. Does that make sense?
No, it does. So let's land this plane. And when
we hadn't taken off yet.
When we started, I said I have no idea where this is going, and I didn't have any idea where it was going. So we've been really conceptual, big high-level stuff. So bring it down to a consultant, a grower in the Mississippi Delta. What do you say to that guy? He's just overwhelmed. He's got labor problems. He's got all this ESA stuff that's going on. It's just one hit after another, after another, after another. So what do you tell those guys in relation to what we've been talking about here, Bobby, that they can take and use in the short term? And maybe it's just a vote of confidence that, hey, man, the way you're doing this currently is sustainable until the next innovation hits.
Everything we're doing right now, we're pushing into a realm of sustainability, right? So you look at 25 years ago, there was no MBPT being sold on the market.
Agritane.
Trade name Agritane.
Many other trade names.
Many other trade names.
That's the one we know.
Right.
It's like Roundup.
It's like Roundup. Think about the greenhouse gases that we've mitigated in the last 25 years since we put MBPT on the market. I would say roughly, just looking around, the majority of urea fertilizer that we sell in the Mississippi Delta is coated with an MBPT containing product. Look at that advancement. And that's just in the last 25 years, right?
Well,
20 years, okay? So The next thing is, how do we fit these biologicals into it? How do we fit other sustainability practices into it to even be more sustainable? I'm probably going to say today, and a lot of people don't believe this, we're as sustainable as we've ever been with the tools we have to use.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, again, in the realm of fertility, think about soil testing, advances in soil testing in this same 25-year period that you're talking about, and prescription applications, very site-specific applications that we didn't do 25 years ago.
Well, and then you bring the digital side into it, right? We talked a little bit earlier about iPhones. Now we've hooked all these computers to tractors. We're better with our application. We know where we're putting it. We're making a map. So we can take a soil test. We can take a 2.5 acre grid. We can take a 10 acre zone, or we could do whatever that tractor is going to allow you to apply to, right? So we can be as finite as our application. And our application is getting way more finite, right? So you've got people on farm now running precision fertilizer spreaders that they bought and own.
Right.
That wasn't happening 10 years ago.
No, you borrowed it. And I've heard you say, you would say something about your biggest input and you're putting out with a borrowed implement.
Yep.
That may or may not be calibrated correctly.
That's 100% right.
And I'm not naive enough to think that that's not going to change even more drastically in another decade, because I think that's, based on our age group, I think that's probably the one thing that we should at least retrospectively discuss.
I was having a conversation with one of our growers the other day, and his greatest concern for the Mississippi Delta was, what does it look like when every farm is 40 to 50,000 acres? Because in his opinion, that's where we're going. Farms are going to get bigger. They're going to get more corporate. And this guy farms a considerable amount of land. His exact words to me were, how can we not afford to make it on $12 soybeans? And I don't know how to wrap all that into it. I don't know. We'll have to cut all this out and piece it together, because this isn't even about soil fertility. It's just about where we're going is
the future of production agriculture.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you said, Bobby, I think is encouraging to a grower or a consultant, or that anyone who has intimate contact with a farm in the Mississippi Delta, that, to use your phrase, they are the tip of the spear on the innovation. I mean, we chase them a lot. Everybody gets phone calls depending on their area that they work in, and a guy makes a suggestion like, I never thought about that. Well, so, I mean, they are the innovators, and so they are the ones that are sustaining the continued pursuit of global food production.
And I would say, if you look at a lot of these softer chemistries and stuff, they're coming to us wanting them, right? These guys are like, okay, I need to grow more bushels. I said a while ago, we're the most sustainable we've ever been. You're developing the best weed control programs you can. You're developing the best fungicide programs you can. We deliver people the best fertilizer programs they can. And right now we're stuck at a yield level. And how do I get that extra 5 bushels? How do I get that extra 2 bushels? Because there's a lot of guys out there farming at scale that just need to get 1.5 bushels.
Right.
So it's all about ROI at the end of the day. And can some of these new practices that we're looking at increase my ROI? Because it doesn't matter how much money you spend as long as you make more money than you spend, right? We always talk about what's sustainable.
That's right.
In business,
sustainable,
you got to turn a profit.
Yeah, sustainable is making enough money to be able to do it again next year.
Yeah, so
that's what my daddy always said. Bobby, we appreciate it, man.
Heck yeah, brother.
It's always a pleasure.
Long on time, but we can talk from now on about it.
I think we need to continue this conversation to put it all together, actually.
Tom, go do whatever Tom does on Friday afternoons.
Let's not talk about that.
Cool.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.